One second I was reaching for my reading glasses on the kitchen counter, and the next I was on the floor. My right knee twisted underneath me, my wrist screaming where I'd tried to catch myself. I heard something crack. I didn't know yet what it was. I just knew I couldn't get up. The linoleum was cold against my cheek. I could see the bottom of the refrigerator from where I lay, the little strip of dust along the base that I kept meaning to wipe down. Funny, the things you notice when you can't move. I tried to push myself up twice. The second time, the pain shot through my wrist so hard I cried out and there was nobody there to hear it. I'm 67 years old. I've lived alone since my husband passed 6 years ago. I know how to manage. I know how to fix a leaking faucet, how to drive myself to the doctor, how to get through Christmas without making anyone feel guilty. I've never been the kind of woman who asks for help, but lying there on that floor, I understood, in a way I never had before, what it means to truly need another person. My phone was on the kitchen table, about 4 feet away. It took me 22 minutes to reach it. I know it was 22 minutes because when I finally got the phone in my hand, I looked at the clock. It was 8:47 in the morning. I'd been on that floor since 8:25. I know because I'd just checked the time before I reached for my glasses, thinking about whether I had time for a second cup of coffee before my Thursday morning walk. I called my daughter first. She didn't answer. I called my son-in-law, straight to voicemail. I called my daughter again. Nothing. So I called 911, and I lay there and talked to the dispatcher in what I hoped was a calm voice, and she stayed on the line with me until the ambulance came. They found me still in my bathrobe, on the kitchen floor, with my phone pressed against my ear. My wrist was fractured. Clean break, the ER doctor said. Like that was somehow reassuring. They put me in a soft cast, gave me something for the pain, and told me I'd need to follow up with an orthopedic specialist within the week. They also said I shouldn't be alone for at least the first few nights, given my age and the fall risk. The hospital tried to reach my daughter 4 times over the course of that morning. I gave them her number myself from the gurney. I told them she was probably just busy, probably just had her phone on silent. She did that sometimes during work meetings. She called back 3 hours later. "Mom, oh my gosh, are you okay? I just saw all these missed calls. I broke my wrist," I said. "I fell this morning." "Your wrist? Oh no. Is it bad?" "It's a fracture. They want someone to stay with me for a few days." There was a pause. Not long. Maybe 2 seconds. But I've known my daughter for 39 years, and I know what her pauses mean. "The thing is," she said, "we're actually out of town right now." I didn't say anything. We drove down to Savannah yesterday. It was kind of a last-minute thing. Keith's cousin is getting married, and we thought since it was a long weekend anyway. "Savannah," I said, I know the timing is terrible. I feel awful. But we're already here and the wedding is tomorrow. And Keith's whole family, it's fine," I said. "I'll figure it out." "Are you sure? I can try to find someone. Maybe Mrs. Potzel from your street could check in." I said I'll figure it out. We hung up. I lay in that hospital bed and I stared at the ceiling tiles and I thought about the last 3 years. Not in an angry way. Not yet. More like the way you piece together a puzzle when you finally found the missing piece and you realize it was under the couch the whole time. I had moved to Charlotte 18 months ago. My daughter had suggested it. She and Keith had just bought a bigger house in the suburbs, plenty of room, and she said it made sense for me to be closer now that I was older and on my own. I agreed. I sold the house I'd lived in for 24 years, the house where I raised her, and I bought a condo 12 minutes from their front door. In 18 months, she had come over 11 times. I counted once, by accident, when I was flipping through my calendar looking for something else. 11 times. A few of those were just quick drop-offs, bringing over a casserole she'd made too much of, or picking up a book she'd left at my place. Actual visits, actual sitting down and talking visits, maybe 6. Keith, I'd come to understand, was not fond of me. He was perfectly polite. He was always perfectly polite. But there was a quality to his politeness that made me feel like a meeting he'd been scheduled into but hadn't asked for. He called me by my first name, Loretta, with a slight emphasis, the way you'd address someone you've been told to treat as an equal but don't quite believe it. My daughter loved him. That I never doubted. And I never said a word, because what was there to say? That your husband makes me feel like a visitor in your life? That the move to Charlotte was supposed to mean something, but I'm not sure what anymore. I figured it out, like I said I would. My neighbor from down the hall, a retired school teacher named Philippa, came and stayed with me the first 2 nights. She brought soup and a puzzle, and we watched game shows, and she pretended not to notice when I took a little longer than usual to get up from the couch. My daughter called each day, short calls, checking in. I told her I was fine. I was fine. She came by the Tuesday after she got back from Savannah. She brought flowers. Yellow tulips, my favorite, so she remembered that, and she sat on my couch and told me all about the wedding. The venue, the dress, the dinner. Keith's cousin had looked beautiful. The band had been excellent. They'd stayed an extra night because the hotel had a pool and the weather was perfect. "I'm so glad you had a nice time," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "Mom, are you upset with me?" "No," I said, and I wasn't. Not yet. I just felt something settling in me, like sediment. She left after an hour. Keith was waiting in the car. The orthopedic appointment was 2 weeks after the fall. They confirmed the fracture, adjusted my cast, and told me to come back in 6 weeks. On the way home, I stopped at the pharmacy, and while I was waiting for my prescription, I sat in one of those plastic chairs near the blood pressure machine, and I thought about what my life actually looked like. My daughter was 12 minutes away. I had been on the floor for 22 minutes and in the hospital for most of a day before she'd called back. She'd been at a wedding with a pool while the hospital tried to reach her 4 times. I thought about what I would do if something worse happened. If it hadn't been a wrist, if I hadn't been able to reach the phone. I thought about Philippa, who had come without hesitation, who had sat with me and watched game shows and hadn't made me feel like a burden for a single second. I went home. I sat at my kitchen table. I opened my laptop and I looked up the number for the estate attorney I'd used when I updated my will after my husband died. I wasn't angry. I want to be clear about that because anger would have made this easier in some ways. What I felt was more like clarity, the kind that comes when you've been squinting at something for a long time and you finally put your glasses on. I had a will that left everything to my daughter. The condo, my savings, 31 years of careful saving, my husband's life insurance, what was left after I bought the place in Charlotte, a sum that would be meaningful to someone, a sum that, I realized, my daughter and Keith were probably aware of. I made an appointment for the following Thursday. I didn't tell my daughter about the appointment. I didn't tell anyone. Philippa drove me because I still couldn't drive easily with my wrist, and she waited in the lobby and read a magazine and didn't ask questions. The attorney's name was Gordon. He'd handled my estate documents before, knew my situation. I told him I wanted to revise the will and also establish a revocable living trust. I explained that I wanted to restructure how my assets would be managed and distributed. He didn't blink. He'd heard it all before. We spent 2 hours going through it. I wasn't cutting my daughter out entirely. That felt like punishment, and this wasn't about punishment. It was about structure. It was about making sure that certain decisions about my assets couldn't be made without my explicit, documented consent while I was living, and that after I was gone, the distribution would go through a trustee rather than directly to her and Keith to manage as they saw fit. I also named Philippa as my emergency contact and healthcare proxy. She'd already proven what that meant in practice. I signed the documents. Gordon said he'd have everything finalized within 2 weeks. I walked out of that office into the September afternoon and felt, for the first time in a long time, like I was standing on solid ground. The call came on a Saturday morning, about 3 weeks after the attorney appointment. I was on my small balcony with my coffee. The wrist was healing. It had rained the night before and everything smelled like wet grass, and the neighbors 2 floors down had the kind of wind chimes that actually sound pleasant rather than frantic. It was a good morning. My phone rang. My daughter, Mom. Her voice was different, tight. I got a letter from Gordon Pierce's office. Gordon Pierce, my attorney. I know who Gordon Pierce is, I said. There's a trust document and a revised will. A beat. You changed everything. I restructured things, yes. Mom, why didn't you tell me? We're both really concerned. This came out of nowhere. Did it? I said. Silence. What does that mean? I set my coffee down on the little table beside my chair. I looked out at the parking lot below, the row of trees along the far edge just starting to turn. I thought about what I wanted to say and, more importantly, how I wanted to say it. Not in anger, not as an accusation, just as the truth. I was on the floor for 22 minutes, I said. I couldn't get up. I called you twice before I called 911. The hospital called you 4 times while I was in the ER. Mom, I've already apologized for that. I know you have. And I believe you feel bad about it. But feeling bad about something isn't the same as it not having happened. I paused. When your father was sick, do you remember what I did? She didn't answer. I drove him to every appointment for 2 years. I slept in a recliner chair in his hospital room. I managed his medication schedule, his insurance claims, the insurance disputes, when they denied his second infusion. I did all of that because he was my person, and that's what you do for your person. I know, Mom. I moved to Charlotte because you said it made sense. I sold the house I lived in for 24 years. I'm 12 minutes from your front door. You've come over 11 times in 18 months. She started to say something. I kept going, gently. I'm not trying to hurt you. I want you to hear me say that. I'm not doing this out of anger or to punish you or Keith. I'm doing this because I needed to make sure that if something happens to me, something worse than a broken wrist, the decisions about my care and my assets are with someone who has actually shown up. That's what those documents reflect. The line was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Less tight. More something else. Something that might have been the beginning of understanding, or might have been the beginning of a different kind of argument I didn't want to have. Is this about Keith? She asked. This is about me, I said, and what I need. She said she needed some time to think. I told her that was fine. We hung up without making plans to see each other, which was not unusual, and I picked up my coffee and it was still warm, and the wind chimes were still pleasant, and the trees along the far edge were still turning. I won't tell you the months that followed were easy. They weren't. My daughter and I went through a period that I can only describe as careful. Careful conversations, careful visits. Both of us navigating around the shape of what had been said. Keith called me once, a conversation I won't detail except to say that it confirmed a few things I'd suspected and left me feeling calm in a way that I think surprised him. What I will tell you is what changed. The visits became more real. Not more frequent at first, but more real. She started coming alone sometimes without Keith, and sitting at my kitchen table the way she used to when she was in her 20s and going through something and needed to just be with me without solving anything. We talked about her father more. We talked about what the move to Charlotte had meant for both of us and what we'd both assumed about it that we'd never actually said out loud. Philippa and I started having dinner together on Friday nights. Nothing elaborate. Sometimes just soup and bread and a movie. She was 71 and had 2 grown sons in other states, and we understood each other in the way that people do when they've sat beside each other in the difficult parts of life. My daughter came to one of those Friday dinners, eventually. She brought a bottle of wine, and she and Philippa talked for 2 hours about teaching. Because my daughter had also been a teacher for 4 years before she went into operations management, and I sat across the table and watched them and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly, fuller than that. My wrist healed. My attorney confirmed the trust documents were fully executed. I bought myself a better pair of reading glasses, the kind that actually stay on your face when you lean down, and I put them in 3 places around the apartment so I would never have to reach for them again. I think about that morning sometimes. The floor, the 22 minutes, the way the dust looked along the bottom of the refrigerator. I don't think about it with bitterness. I think about it the way you think about a moment that changed the angle of everything. Quietly, without drama, but completely. I was 67 years old, and I had spent most of my life making myself easy to overlook, easy to postpone, easy to fit in around whatever else was happening. I had done it so naturally for so long that I hadn't noticed I was doing it. I'm not doing it anymore. If you're hearing this, and something in it sounds familiar, if you know what it is to be the one who always figures it out, always says it's fine, always moves the appointment, or skips the call, or tells yourself that your needs are smaller than they are. I want you to hear this from someone who spent 22 minutes on a kitchen floor figuring it out the hard way. You are not a burden for needing people to show up. You are not being difficult for noticing when they don't. The moments that break something open in us are not punishments. They are, if we let them be, the clearest information we will ever receive about what we actually need and who is actually there. I needed to know that. Now I do. I keep coming back to those 22 minutes, not to punish myself with them and not to use them as ammunition, just because they were so honest. The floor doesn't lie to you. The dust along the bottom of the refrigerator doesn't lie to you. When you're down there and you can't get up and you're calling the one person who is supposed to be 12 minutes away and the phone just rings, that's information. Clean, simple, undeniable information about where you actually stand in someone else's life. What I did with that information, that's the part I think about now. I could have gotten up, gone home from the hospital, accepted the tulips, listened to the story about the wedding band, and quietly returned to the version of myself that always figured it out and never made anyone feel guilty. I had done that for years. It's a habit that forms so slowly you don't notice it forming. You tell yourself you're being gracious. You tell yourself you're being easy to love. But at some point, gracious becomes invisible, and invisible becomes forgettable, and forgettable becomes lying on a kitchen floor with nobody coming. What changed for me wasn't the fall. It was the moment I sat in that plastic chair at the pharmacy and looked at my life honestly, really honestly, not the version I'd been narrating to myself, and understood that I had been making a series of quiet choices to make myself smaller, to need less, to ask for less, to count myself as the last priority in my own story. That took something I can only describe as courage to see clearly. Not the dramatic kind. I didn't have a revelation. I just sat there under fluorescent lights and let the truth be true without arguing with it, and then I did something about it. I called Gordon. I restructured my estate. I named Philippa as my healthcare proxy because Philippa had shown up at 9 in the morning with soup and a puzzle without being asked, while my daughter was on her way to a pool in Savannah. I made decisions based on what people had actually done, not what I hoped they might do or what I remembered them doing 20 years ago. That's the thing nobody tells you about getting older. You have to keep updating your information. You can't keep running your life on data from 1987. People change. Circumstances change. The version of your daughter who used to call you every Sunday and the version who sends a quick text when she remembers. Those aren't the same person, and pretending they are doesn't help either of you. Me, had to learn it the hard way. Had to be on the floor first. But I learned it. What I know now is this: the people who show up when it's inconvenient are the ones who actually love you. Philippa didn't have to come. She had her own life, her own aches, Her own sons who didn't call enough. She came anyway. That's character. That's what it looks like when someone has built something solid inside themselves, something that holds when the situation isn't comfortable or convenient or easy to schedule around. I don't have bitterness about my daughter. Genuinely, I think she loves me in the way she knows how to love me, which is carefully and at a distance, and mostly when Keith is okay with it. That's her limitation to work through, not mine to keep accommodating. What I have now is clarity, and Philippa's soup on Friday nights, and reading glasses in 3 spots around the apartment, and a life that is structured around what is real, not what I wish were true. You can't build a stable life on what you wish were true. You can only build it on what's actually there.